Welcome back to the application module of the course An Intuitive Introduction to Probability, Decision Making in an Uncertain World. After looking at two playful applications of probability, today in this lecture I want to talk about very serious application where things went wrong. We're going to look at one of the core problems of the financial crisis that happened in 07 to 09. And this has to do with the structuring of risks in finance. Unfortunately, to really hit that point home, I have to introduce a little bit of finance to you. It won't be too much, but I need a little bit of background so you can understand what went wrong in the financial crisis. We need to talk about bonds. What are bonds? When a company wants to do a big project, a big construction project, or wants to build a huge new factory, that company may need a lot of money. More money than it has in the bank. So it needs a loan. Now, one way to get this loan is to get a bank, just like you and I do. When we need a loan, we go to a bank and the bank gives us money and we pay the loan back. Companies now have a second way to do this. They can borrow money from the financial markets, where lots of us give this company some money, and that's done through a bond. So a bond is what's called a debt obligation. So they have a debt obligation to us, the lenders, and that's how we give them money, and in the end they give us the money back, and along the way we hopefully get some interest. Now something can go wrong. The company could go bankrupt and then default on its loan, meaning it does not pay back the loan. So that's very bad for you and me. If we gave that some of our money to that company and then they default on us, we're going to be mad because they don't give us money back. Now, let's now look at a black and white scenario. No default, we get our money back, or default, we get no money back. Now, since we don't know the inner workings of these companies, we, or investors in general, rely on so-called rating agencies, which give ratings to these bonds and tell them, oh, this is a safe investment, or this is sort of a more risky investment. These companies get so-called credit ratings. The best ratings is a AAA, AAA. That's the best you can get. Then it goes down all the way to CCC. To simplify the discussion, we're going to have very good bonds called investment grade bonds that are considered quite safe, and risky bonds, sort of the junk bonds. Now, these ratings are very important for the companies for at least two reasons. One, the larger the rating, the safer they are considered, the less interest they need to pay us. We, of course, are more comfortable giving our money to a very safe company than to a risky company. Secondly, some investors, some institutional investors, such as pension funds, are only allowed to invest into safe bonds. So these ratings are very important. Here is some historical data on these ratings from a rating agencies. We can think of these now, equilibrium concept 2, once again, empirical probabilities. AAA bonds, for example, it's very unlikely that they default, a probability very close to zero. The same is still true for AA+, and you see it gets gigantically large for really bad ratings such as Cs. So, now we want to understand how these ratings affected the financial crisis and what happened in the financial crisis. In the financial crisis, or before the crisis actually happened, these risks, these bonds got pooled. In particular, for those of you who have followed the crisis, there was something called a mortgage-backed security, where these debts were actually the debts of house buyers who bought houses, they needed money, and then lots of these home loans were put together in the funds of these bonds. So now I want to show you how with junky bonds that we put together into a portfolio we can create some good risks. So here now, let's think about that we have two bad investments, two risky investments, two junk bonds. Let's call them X and Y, and they both have a probability of default of 10%. So there's a 10% chance we're going to lose our money. We're not going to be happy about this. And now what people in finance do, and what's at the heart of the financial crisis, they take these junky bonds together and create a new type of asset based on those that's supposedly very safe. And so make some junky stuff into really safe stuff. Now, now let's move towards probabilities. We have two investments. In both investments could either lead to a default or no default. Now we have actually 4 combinations in total. The first investment, default, no default, characterized by little d or little n. Second investment, also a little d or little n, and any pairs possible. DD, both x and y default, dn, x defaults, y does not default, and so on. And remember, we have these probabilities, 10% default, 90% no default. What can now happen to a portfolio if you think about those debts together? When both default, no money comes back. 0, 0 in the sum, the two junk bonds pay 0. If one of them does not default, the other one defaults, the payback is 1. And in the best case scenario, neither of them defaults, both pay back all the money. We get $1 back on each case, gives us $2. Now let's assume those are independent. So the question is, how likely are these 4 possibilities? With independence, we can use the multiplication rule that we learned about in independent probabilities in the first 2 modules and create this probability table. Here in the probability table, you now see the probability that x and y defaults, the intersection probability in the upper left-hand corner of the table, equals the probability of the product of the marginal probability, 0.1 times 0.1. So there's only a 1% chance that both of them default. You do the similar math and you can fill in the table. So let's now do the following. We are now taking the money that comes in from X and Y and we return it to the investors. But we do so in a very special way. We create new investments, I and J, an investment grade and a junk bond. And how are those defined? Look at these 2 tables. On the left, we see the money that comes in from our 2 original junk bonds, X and Y, 0, 1 or 2. And now we split this according to the following rule. And this rule is actually written down by lawyers on paper. The rule is the following. The first dollar that comes in goes to asset I. Any remaining funds go to asset J. Let me repeat this because this is crucial now. The first dollar that comes in, no matter what, goes to I. Any remaining funds go to J. Now let's look what that means. First case, X and Y both default. Nothing comes in. So nothing can go out. I pays 0, J pays 0. The next 2 scenarios, exactly $1 comes in. So who gets the first dollar? The rule says asset I. So asset J again gets nothing. Finally, in the good case, $2 come in, both I and J get $1. Now look at the sum of I plus J. It's exactly the same as X plus Y. So let me emphasize, there is absolutely clean accounting. There's no cheating, no money being hidden, no money being added. Whatever X plus Y pay in are paid out via I and J. But boy, are I and J different here. Look at I. I pays in 3 out of the 4 cases. It only does not pay in the default case, which has a tiny probability of only 1%. So I suddenly looks pretty good, only a 1% chance of default. That's a very good bond that gets a high rating. It has a 99% chance of paying off. So it has investment grade status. Even though X and Y, the ingredients in this financial alchemy, are junk bonds. But because of this split up, of this legal contract of splitting up the money that comes in this peculiar way, I become safe. J, on the other hand, look at J. J only pays in the best case scenario of no default, no default. In all of the other 3 cases, there isn't enough money coming in. Because either no money is coming in or the money that's coming in goes to asset I. So J is super junk, or how the pros in finance call it, toxic junk. So what happened here? We get junk plus junk, X and Y, and out of it we get a very safe asset I, and we get the toxic junk J. And that's what structured finance is all about. Now, you may have heard or read in the newspaper the term collateralized debt obligations. This is a multi-trillion-dollar. And by the way, this is not a typo. I'm not talking about millions or billions. It's trillion-dollar market. These are thousands of billions. And in finance, banks do this with mortgages, car loans. In countries where you have student loans, this is done with student loans, credit card debt. This is a gigantic market where people take group debts together and cut it off in these what's called tranches. Now, I know this was a heavy module. I gave you the basic idea of structured finance, how we pool risks together and then create new risks with different risk levels. Remember, junk plus junk gave safe plus toxic junk. But did you notice a probability in here? We assumed some independence. And that was a crucial mistake the rating agencies made in the financial crisis. They relied on this independence. And that's why this I looked so golden. In the next lecture, we're going to talk about dependence, when that assumption falls apart. And then all hell breaks loose, as we saw in 2007. Stay tuned for more. The story continues.